Hey guys, tonight we step back, way back, to a world where Netflix was a distant dream, and indoor plumbing. Forget about it. Imagine waking up to the crowing of a rooster, the smell of wood smoke clinging to the air, and the gnawing realization that your entire day will be spent toiling under the relentless sun. You're a medieval peasant, and honestly, statistically speaking, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Where are you all listening from tonight? Post your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious to see how far and wide this little time machine reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun, a fiery orb in the sky, beats down on your back as you trudge through the muddy field. The soil clings to your worn leather boots, making each step a small victory. Today, like most days, your stomach rumbles a persistent, unhappy tune. Your main concern? Finding enough food to see you through until tomorrow. Forget elaborate meals with multiple courses. For you, survival is a matter of simple sustenance. Your day revolves around the growing season. Spring is a desperate dance of planting seeds, hoping for rain, and warding off pests, both the four-legged and the two-legged kind. Summer brings backbreaking work under that relentless sun, harvesting what you've sown. Autumn is a brief period of relative plenty, a race against the clock to store enough food to survive the long, harsh winter. And winter, well, winter is a test of endurance, a constant battle against cold and hunger. The cornerstone of your diet? Grain. Mostly barley and wheat, ground into flour and baked into coarse, dark bread. This bread is your staple, your daily bread, quite literally. It's dense, heavy, and often stale, but it fills your belly, at least for a little while. You might dip it in thin vegetable broth, or if you're lucky, add a bit of cheese or salted meat for flavor. Historians still argue whether the average peasant got more enjoyment from the simplicity of ingredients, or were simply too exhausted to care. Speaking of flavor, spices are a luxury reserved for the wealthy. Salt is your most prized seasoning, used sparingly to preserve meat and add a touch of taste to your bland meals. Imagine a world without pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg. Bland, right? You're right. Vegetables are a welcome addition to your plate, though your options are limited. Think hearty root vegetables like turnips, carrots, and parsnips. You might also have some cabbage, onions, or garlic growing in your small garden plot. These vegetables are boiled into soups and stews, providing essential vitamins and minerals, even if they don't taste particularly exciting. Fruits are a rare treat, mostly available in the late summer and autumn. Apples, pears, berries, these are precious delicacies, savored for their sweetness. You might also forage for wild fruits and nuts in the nearby woods, though you have to be careful to avoid the watchful eyes of the Lord's foresters. Poaching from the Lord's lands could have serious consequences, and a full stomach is no excuse when facing the judge. Meat? That's a special occasion. Perhaps you'll slaughter a pig in the autumn, salting and smoking the meat to preserve it for the winter months. On feast days, you might indulge in a bit of roast chicken or goose. But most of the time, meat is a luxury you can only dream of. You might supplement your diet with eggs from your chickens, or perhaps catch a rabbit or a few fish if you're skilled with a snare or a fishing rod. But these are sporadic additions, not reliable sources of protein. Dairy products are also important. Milk, cheese, and butter provide essential nutrients and fats. You might keep a cow or a goat for milk, which you can also use to make cheese and butter. These dairy products help to add some variety and flavor to your otherwise monotonous diet. And then there's ale. Forget fancy wines and spirits, ale is the drink of choice for peasants. It's made from fermented barley or wheat, and it's weaker than modern beer. But it provides a source of hydration and a few extra calories, and it's often safer to drink than water, which can be contaminated with all sorts of nasty things. It's not uncommon for entire families to consume ale throughout the day, a practice that seems strange to us today, but was absolutely vital for survival then. Your cooking methods are simple and straightforward. You have a fireplace in your humble home, and you cook your food in a pot hanging over the fire. You might also bake bread in a communal oven in the village. Roasting meat is a luxury, reserved for special occasions. Most of the time, you're boiling or stewing your food. It might not be gourmet cuisine, but it gets the job done. Beyond the basics, you might supplement your diet with whatever you can find in the wild. Mushrooms, herbs, and edible plants are foraged from the forests and fields. You have to be careful to avoid poisonous plants, of course, but you learn what's safe to eat from a young age. Knowledge of the natural world is essential for survival. One quirky fact: did you know that dandelions were considered a valuable food source? Every part of the plant is edible, and they're packed with nutrients. Your diet is also heavily influenced by the seasons. In the spring and summer, you have access to fresh vegetables and fruits. In the autumn, you harvest your crops and prepare for the winter. And in the winter, you rely on your stored food, dried grains, salted meat, and root vegetables. It's a constant cycle of feast and famine, and you have to be prepared for both. One of the biggest challenges you face is food preservation. You don't have refrigerators or freezers, so you have to find ways to preserve your food for the winter. Salting meat, drying grains, and pickling vegetables are all common methods. You also store food in cool, dark places to prevent it from spoiling. Food spoilage is a serious problem, and it can lead to illness and even death. Your diet is also affected by your social status. If you're a wealthy peasant, you might have access to a wider variety of foods. You might be able to afford more meat, spices, and dairy products. But if you're a poor peasant, your diet is even more limited. You might struggle to find enough food to feed your family, and you might have to rely on charity from the church or the Lord. And let's be honest, sometimes the food you eat is downright unappetizing. Think about it, you're eating food that's been preserved for months, often not very well. It might be moldy, rancid, or infested with insects. But you don't have a choice. You eat what you can get, and you try not to think about it too much. After all, survival is the name of the game. Historians still debate the precise nutritional value of the medieval peasant diet. Some argue that it was surprisingly balanced, providing essential nutrients and calories. Others argue that it was deficient in certain vitamins and minerals, leading to health problems. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Your diet is certainly not ideal, but it's enough to keep you alive, at least most of the time. You may face periods of famine, where crops fail and food becomes scarce. Famine can have devastating consequences, leading to widespread starvation and death. You have to be prepared for the worst, and you have to be resourceful and resilient to survive. These were extremely difficult times, and the effects of undernutrition on the population certainly played a role in some rather bleak historical events. Your diet is a reflection of your life, simple, hard, and often unforgiving. But it's also a testament to your resilience and your ability to survive in the face of adversity. You learn to appreciate the simple things in life, the taste of fresh bread, the warmth of a fire, and the company of your family. It's probably a relief to learn that you get to leave the field now, to wake up from this rather grimy dream of medieval peasant life. But as you drift off tonight, consider the incredible privilege of having a stocked refrigerator and a variety of foods available at your fingertips. You probably won't be dipping bread in vegetable broth anytime soon, and for that, you can be immensely grateful. Okay, settle in, friend. Let's talk pottage. Yeah, pottage. Sounds kinda medieval, right? Because, well, it is. You trudge along a muddy path, the insistent drizzle plastering your thin, woolen tunic to your back. It's cold. You're hungry. And you're probably thinking about pottage. Pottage, my friend, was the original peasant fuel. Think of it as the ancient, less photogenic ancestor of ramen, or maybe a really, really sad minestrone. But don't underestimate it. For centuries, this humble stew kept untold millions alive. And chances are, your ancestors probably slurped down a bowl or two. Maybe even 3. Imagine, great-grandma with a stained wooden spoon, gleefully digging into a pot of, well, whatever was handy. You can almost smell it, can't you? That earthy, slightly, indeterminate aroma. A base of water, of course, because water was plentiful, unless you lived through a drought. Then, into the pot went whatever the local serf could get their calloused hands on. Grains like barley or oats provided the bulk. Maybe some legumes, beans, peas, lentils, if you were lucky. Root vegetables were a godsend, turnips, parsnips, carrots, if you weren't already feeding them all to the livestock. And, if fortune smiled, a scrap of meat. A bone gnawed clean by the Lord's hounds, perhaps, tossed your way as a gesture of charity. A particularly chewy bit of gristle. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth, I always say. Unless you're planning on eating it, of course. Spices? Forget about it. Unless you considered wild garlic a spice. Salt was valuable, often more precious than actual vegetables, so you might have to get by with the earthy flavor of whatever herbs you could find growing wild. Nettles, dandelions, even tree bark in a pinch, historians are still researching the full range of creative ingredients. You basically threw the whole garden in there. And prayed. You know, medieval peasants, the backbone of the feudal system, were incredibly hardworking. Think about it, dawn, till dusk, toiling in the fields, then coming home to pottage. Not exactly a Michelin star meal. But, it provided sustenance. It filled bellies. And most importantly, it meant you could keep toiling. You kept the whole economic engine going. And for that, you got more pottage. Now, before you start feeling too sorry for our medieval buddies, remember that pottage wasn't always terrible. The beauty of it was its adaptability. Pottage was a chameleon, changing with the seasons, the region, and of course, the social status of the cook. If you were a slightly better off peasant, maybe you owned a few chickens, or you were particularly good at snaring rabbits, your pottage might contain bits of actual meat. Fancy that. Think of all those rabbits. In the 12th century, rabbit farming started to take off. Rabbit warrens sprung up all over the country, and landowners employed warreners to keep everything in order. A warren, by the way, is not just a rabbit home, it's an entire man-made system of burrows, designed to keep rabbits happy and reproducing. Imagine being a warrener. Your whole job is to make sure rabbits are having a good time. Now that's a life. A life potentially ending in pottage, but still. And don't forget the potential for added herbs. A little parsley, perhaps, or some thyme. Wild mustard could add a nice kick. In coastal areas, seaweed might find its way into the pot, lending a salty, briny flavor. It might sound gross, but hey, you were grateful for the variety. After all, variety is the spice of life. Even when you're actively avoiding spices. Even the very wealthy ate pottage. Okay, they called it something fancier, like bouillon, or stew, and theirs was, shall we say, a tad more refined. They had access to spices, imported from faraway lands. They had meat, lots of meat. Venison, boar, even peacock, if they were feeling particularly ostentatious. Their pottage might include wine, or cream, or even, sugar. Can you imagine? Sugar in pottage. The peasant's mind reels. But the basic concept was the same, a simmering pot of stuff. Only their stuff was considerably more stuff. A few carrots versus, like, a golden pheasant. And you know what else the rich had? Trained cooks. These culinary masters could take even the humblest ingredients and transform them into something palatable, even, dare I say, delicious. They knew how to balance flavors, how to coax the most out of each ingredient, and how to present the dish in a way that was pleasing to the eye. Peasants, on the other hand, just chucked everything in a pot and hoped for the best. Presentation was low on the priority list when you were starving. One thing that might surprise you is that pottage was often cooked in a single, communal pot, hanging over the fire in the center of the home. You just dip in when you're hungry. Sharing food brought people together, literally. Think of it as the medieval version of a potluck, only instead of bringing your own dish, everyone just contributed whatever they could find to the communal pottage. And some contributed nothing. This brings us to the concept of trenchers. In medieval times, people often ate their pottage from trenchers, large slabs of stale bread that served as plates. After you finished your meal, you could either eat the trencher itself, if it wasn't too soggy, or you could give it to the dogs. Or, if you were really fancy, you could give it to the poor. Waste not, want not, right? Speaking of being fancy, did you know that spoons weren't always standard issue? Many people simply used their fingers to scoop up the pottage. So, you'd have this communal pot, with everyone dipping their fingers in, eating from trenchers, and generally having a grand old time. Maybe. Or maybe not. Disease spread like wildfire, but at least everyone had a full stomach, for a little while. Now, historians still argue whether pottage was actually that bad. Was it truly a bland, monotonous gruel, or was it a more nuanced and flavorful dish than we give it credit for? Some argue that the lack of written recipes from the period makes it difficult to accurately reconstruct the flavors of medieval pottage. Others point to archaeological evidence, like the discovery of spice residue in ancient cooking pots, suggesting that even the poorest peasants had access to at least some seasonings. It's a deep debate, and there's only one way to settle it. Time to try making a modern version for yourself. You could easily whip up a simple pottage at home. Take some water or broth as your base. Add some chopped vegetables, carrots, celery, onions. Throw in some lentils or beans for protein. Season with salt, pepper, and maybe a pinch of thyme. Simmer it all together until the vegetables are tender. And voila! You have a basic pottage. It's not exactly haute cuisine, but it's surprisingly satisfying. So, next time you're enjoying a hearty bowl of soup, take a moment to think about pottage. Think about the millions of peasants who relied on this humble dish to survive. Think about the resourcefulness and resilience of the human spirit. And be grateful that you don't have to eat pottage every single day. Unless, of course, you really like pottage. In that case, bon appetit. And maybe see a doctor, just to be sure everything's alright. And with that, let's consider the circle complete. You've walked in the muddy footsteps of your peasant ancestors, smelled the, admittedly faint, aroma of their daily sustenance, and maybe even developed a newfound appreciation for the simple things in life. You now have a nice recipe to go to after. Sleep tight. And don't let the pottage bugs bite. Alright, hey there, sleepyheads. Let's settle in for a little chat about something foundational. Something crusty. I'm talking about bread. You know, bread. That thing you probably take for granted most days. Maybe you slap some peanut butter on it, or maybe it's just the vehicle for your avocado toast dreams. But trust me, bread is way more than just a convenient carbohydrate delivery system. It's been the bedrock of civilizations, the fuel for empires, and, yeah, sometimes a real pain in the you-know-what to produce. Imagine, if you will, a world without bread. You're suddenly very hungry, aren't you? Your sandwich is gone, your toast is gone, well, you get the picture. It's a bleak culinary landscape. For millennia, bread was the everything. It was sustenance, security, even social status. In ancient Egypt, for example, bread was so vital it was practically currency. Workers were often paid in loaves of bread and jugs of beer. Talk about a carb-loading workplace. Think about it. The shift from nomadic hunter-gatherers to settled agricultural societies wouldn't have been possible without the ability to cultivate grains and turn them into something storable and, well, delicious. You trudge through the field, the sun beating down on your back. You're sweating, your clothes are sticking to you, and you're pretty sure you've got a sunburn starting. You gather the wheat, the barley, the rye, whatever you're lucky enough to have in this particular part of the world. It's backbreaking work, but you know that this harvest means survival. This is the difference between feasting and famine. You bundle the grain together, hauling it back to the settlement. The hard work doesn't end there, no. Now you've got to thresh it, separating the grain from the chaff. This means beating the heck out of it, basically. After that, you've got to grind it into flour. Maybe you've got a fancy stone mill, powered by a donkey or a river. Maybe you're just using a couple of rocks and a whole lot of elbow grease. Either way, it's a dusty, tiring process. Are we relaxed yet? Just picturing all this labor is making me sleepy. And that flour, well, it's not exactly the finely milled, bleached stuff you buy at the supermarket these days. It's gritty, it's full of bits of bran, and it probably has a few bugs in it for good measure. But hey, protein. This is where the magic of bread making truly begins. You mix the flour with water, maybe some salt, if you're lucky. And if you're really lucky, you've got some yeast. Wild yeast, floating around in the air, just waiting to be captured and put to work. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians were the first to discover the magic of yeast-risen bread, or if it was some other ancient civilization. But whoever it was a game changer. Before yeast, you were basically stuck with flatbreads, unleavened things like pita or tortillas. Still tasty, mind you, but not quite the same as a fluffy, airy loaf. You knead the dough, working it until it's smooth and elastic. This is where you pour all your frustrations. Did the guy next door steal your goat again? Knead it out. Did your crops fail last year? Knead it out. Are you just generally tired of the drudgery of existence? You get the idea. You're getting a good workout and making bread. Talk about multitasking. Then comes the hardest part, waiting. You have to let the dough rest and rise, allowing the yeast to do its thing. This can take hours, even days, depending on the temperature and the type of yeast you're using. It requires patience. You try to be patient as the dough slowly but surely begins to grow. It's a living thing, quietly bubbling and expanding, filling the room with that intoxicating aroma of fermentation. You can almost taste it, the earthy, slightly sour tang of the rising dough. Finally, it's ready. You shape it into loaves or rolls, maybe decorate it with some seeds or herbs if you're feeling fancy. It's like playing Play-Doh, but edible, mostly. Then, you bake it. A roaring fire, a hot stone oven. You carefully slide the loaves inside, and then you wait again. This time, the reward is much closer. The aroma of baking bread fills the air, a promise of warmth and nourishment. You peek inside the oven, watching as the loaves transform from pale, shapeless blobs into golden brown works of art. It's a process as primal as it is beautiful. Now, you might think that the invention of bread was all sunshine and roses. But of course, nothing is ever that simple. While it provided sustenance and stability, it also created new problems. For one thing, it made people more reliant on specific crops. If the wheat crop failed, for example, it wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it was a full-blown disaster. Famine and starvation were constant threats. Think about the Irish potato famine, a stark reminder of what happens when a population becomes too dependent on a single crop. And speaking of crops, early forms of wheat were often contaminated with a fungus called ergot. Eating ergot-infected grain could cause all sorts of nasty symptoms, including hallucinations, convulsions, and even death. Some historians believe that ergot poisoning may have been responsible for events like the Salem witch trials. Talk about a bad trip. But the difficulties in bread production didn't end with the harvest. Grinding grain was also a major challenge. Hand grinding was slow and laborious. Watermills and windmills helped to automate the process, but they were expensive to build and maintain. And whoever controlled the mills also controlled the supply of flour, which meant they wielded a lot of power. You've probably heard of the bread riots that erupted in France during the French Revolution. When grain prices soared, and bread became unaffordable for the poor, people took to the streets. Let them eat cake, Marie Antoinette allegedly said, though that's likely propaganda. It's a reminder that bread, or lack thereof, can be a powerful catalyst for social unrest. It's a symbol of economic injustice and inequality. Even today, despite all our modern technology and agricultural advancements, bread production isn't without its challenges. Climate change, pests, and diseases all threaten our crops. And the industrialization of bread making has led to concerns about nutrition, food additives, and the loss of traditional techniques. But even though it's not as central to our lives as it once was, bread still holds a special place in our hearts, and our stomachs. It's a comfort food, a symbol of home, and a connection to our past. There's also an interesting side note to bread that you probably haven't considered: the cultural significance of sharing bread. Think about breaking bread with someone. It's an act of friendship, of hospitality, of community. It's a gesture that transcends language and culture. You can offer bread to a stranger, and even if you can't understand each other's words, you can share a moment of connection. And while we're on the topic of culture, did you know that in some cultures, stale bread isn't thrown away? It's used to make all sorts of dishes, from bread pudding to panzanella salad. It's a way of respecting food and minimizing waste. It's also a way of getting creative in the kitchen. So, the next time you bite into a slice of bread, take a moment to appreciate the long and complicated history behind it. Think about all the labor, the ingenuity, and the sheer determination that went into getting that loaf onto your plate. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find that it tastes a little bit better. Also, I bet you didn't know bread can be used as a pretty decent eraser if you are trying to draw and don't have one. I wouldn't suggest using it now though after everything we've discussed. Now, that's a lot to chew on, isn't it? Literally. I hope you enjoyed this little journey through the world of bread. Maybe you'll even be inspired to try baking your own loaf. It's not as easy as it looks, but it's incredibly rewarding. And who knows, you might even discover a hidden talent for bread making. Just don't blame me if you end up covered in flour. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's amble through the veggie patch, shall we? Picture this: you trudge, weary from a day of, well, existing as a peasant, through your little plot. It's rustic. Let's call it rustic. You're not exactly sporting ergonomic gardening gloves, are you? More like calloused hands and a whole lot of hope. The sun, predictably, is either scorching or stubbornly absent, and the soil is, well, soil. It's not exactly the meticulously curated compost of your dreams. But hey, it's your soil. And something, bless its tenacious little heart, is growing in it. Let's start with the stalwarts, the dependable potatoes. Ah, the humble potato. These starchy tubers are your dietary anchors. Boiled, mashed, if you're feeling fancy, which, let's be honest, you probably aren't; roasted, if you have the fuel, which, let's be even more honest, you likely don't; or even just tossed into a stew to thicken it up. Potatoes were your everything. Now, before you start picturing Irish potato famine levels of potato reliance, remember that while the potato took Europe by storm, it wasn't universally adopted overnight. It was more like a gradual, creeping potatoization. Imagine that, potatoization. Sounds like a particularly dull sci-fi dystopia. You're probably thinking, potatoes? Weren't they from the New World? Spot on. Good for you for paying attention in history class, or, just knowing stuff. They didn't really become super common in Europe until well after the Columbian Exchange. Before that, your carb staples were more likely to be things like wheat, barley, or rye, depending on where you were in Europe. But once potatoes arrived, they were a game changer. Historians still argue whether the potato was the key to population growth in early modern Europe, but it definitely played a significant role. I mean, think about it: relatively easy to grow, surprisingly nutritious, and fills you up. What's not to love? Besides maybe the blight, but let's not dwell on that. Now, you're not just eating potatoes, though some days, it probably feels like it. You might have some onions, bravely poking their green shoots out of the ground. Onions. The pungent backbone of countless stews and sauces. They might make you cry while chopping them, with your probably dull knife, but you'd be crying a lot more without them. Fun fact, in some cultures, onions were considered to have medicinal properties. Got a cough? Slap some onions on it. Got the plague? Well, onions probably won't help, but hey, at least your breath will be memorable. Moving on, let's consider beans. Beans, the magical fruit, or vegetable, technically. They're another protein powerhouse. Dried beans were stored throughout the winter. Think of them as little, hard nuggets of survival. You'd soak them, simmer them for what felt like an eternity, and then add them to, well, probably more potatoes. But still, beans. They're good for your heart, and, let's be real, probably other parts of your digestive system too. Then there's cabbage. Oh, cabbage. The workhorse vegetable. Raw, cooked, pickled, fermented into sauerkraut, cabbage could do it all. It's also remarkably resilient, so even if you're a terrible gardener, and let's face it, a lot of peasants probably were, you've got a decent chance of getting at least something resembling cabbage. Think of it as the cockroach of the vegetable world, it just keeps going. And while we're on the topic, let's dispel a myth. Cabbage, contrary to popular belief, doesn't always smell awful when you cook it. If you overcook it, yeah, it's going to stink. But properly cooked cabbage can be surprisingly palatable. Okay, maybe palatable is pushing it. Let's say, not actively offensive. Now, let's talk about the wild side of things. Because your garden, however bountiful it might be, probably isn't enough to sustain you year-round. So, you venture into the woods, armed with a basket and a healthy dose of skepticism, because, poisonous berries are a thing. You're looking for things like wild greens. Dandelions, for example. Yes, those dandelions. The ones you curse when they pop up in your meticulously manicured, okay, probably not, lawn today. Back then, they were dinner. They're surprisingly nutritious, though they can be a bit bitter. Pro tip, blanch them first to reduce the bitterness. Or, just eat them and pretend you like it. Whatever gets you through the day. Then there are mushrooms. Ah, mushrooms. The culinary gamble. Find the right ones, and you're in for a treat. Find the wrong ones, and, well, let's just say you're not going to be feeling too good. Mushroom foraging was a skill passed down through generations, because, frankly, you don't want to learn it through trial and error. Unless you really want to test your intestinal fortitude. Historians still argue whether the average peasant was actually skilled enough to reliably identify edible mushrooms, or if a lot of mushroom-related illnesses were just chalked up to bad luck. I'm leaning towards bad luck, personally. It seems statistically probable. You might also find berries. Wild strawberries, raspberries, blackberries. Little bursts of sweetness in an otherwise fairly drab diet. Of course, you have to compete with the birds for them, and the thorns are a constant menace, but hey, a little pain is a small price to pay for a taste of summer. Unless the berries are poisonous. Then, it's a big price. Nuts were also a valuable find. Acorns, chestnuts, hazelnuts. They require a bit of processing. Acorns, for example, need to be leached to remove the tannins, but they provide a good source of fat and calories. Which, let's be honest, you're probably not getting enough of. You might even stumble across wild garlic or other herbs, adding a bit of much-needed flavor to your meals. Of course, foraging isn't without its risks. You have to be careful not to trespass on someone else's land, especially if that someone is a grumpy lord with a penchant for hunting. And then there's the wildlife. You might encounter a boar, which, depending on your hunting skills, or lack thereof, could be either dinner or a serious problem. Or maybe just a mildly irritated squirrel. They can be surprisingly aggressive when you're trying to steal their nuts. So, there you have it. A glimpse into the garden and the wild, the sources of sustenance for the average peasant. It wasn't always glamorous, or even particularly tasty, but it was enough to keep body and soul together. Most of the time, anyway. And remember, while you might be tempted to romanticize the simplicity of peasant life, keep in mind that they were probably a lot hungrier, dirtier, and more tired than you are right now. And one last quirky little tidbit before you drift off, apparently, some medieval Europeans believed that carrots were originally purple. I don't know why, but I find that endlessly amusing. Purple carrots. It's like something out of a Dr. Seuss book. Anyway, that's all for now. Sweet dreams, and may your gardens be bountiful, and your mushroom foraging, safe. Okay, settle in, because we're diving headfirst into the creamy, cheesy, sometimes questionable world of dairy. Yes, dairy. You know, that stuff that either makes you feel amazing or sends you running to the nearest, well, you know. Let's be honest, the drama with lactose is real. So, just relax, take a deep breath, maybe grab a glass of milk, almond, soy, oat, whatever floats your boat, and let's explore this curd-filled cosmos together. You trudge through the dew-kissed grass, the air thick with the smell of, well, cows. It's a powerful aroma, isn't it? Makes you feel all agricultural, connected to the land. You hear the gentle moo of contented bovines, their massive bodies swaying rhythmically as they chew their cud. You imagine the rich, creamy milk they produce, the foundation for so many culinary delights, or digestive nightmares, depending on your constitution. But hey, no judgment here. You reach out and gently stroke a cow's flank. She seems unbothered, blissfully unaware of her crucial role in human civilization. She's just chilling, chewing, existing. Meanwhile, you are contemplating the wonders of lactic acid fermentation. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it, isn't it? These tiny microorganisms, working tirelessly to transform milk into yogurt, cheese, and a whole host of other delicious and sometimes, pungent, products. Cheese, oh cheese. A love affair for the ages. You imagine a perfectly curated cheese board, glistening with olive oil, studded with nuts and dried fruit. There's the sharp tang of aged cheddar, the earthy funk of brie, the creamy sweetness of fresh mozzarella. Each one a testament to the power of preservation, a culinary time capsule. Did you know that some of the oldest evidence of cheese-making dates back over 7,000 years? Imagine, some Neolithic nomad, stumbling upon a way to transform milk into a longer-lasting, transportable food source. It's a simple act of genius, really. A proto-scientist realizing that milk left in a warm animal skin pouch would curdle and separate, leading to something entirely new, and, let's be honest, probably pretty stinky. You squint, peering into the murky depths of your mental cheese cave. The air is cool, damp, and permeated with the unmistakable aroma of ripening cultures. You picture rows upon rows of aging cheeses, each one a unique ecosystem of microbes, slowly transforming into something extraordinary. You almost hear them whispering, evolving, maturing. It's a whole other world in there. And speaking of stinky, let's talk about Limburger. That stuff is intense. It's the kind of cheese that makes your eyes water and your nose hairs curl. It's so pungent, so overwhelmingly funky, that it's practically weaponized. Legend has it that in the late 19th century, a particularly potent batch of Limburger cheese caused a minor panic in a New York City tenement building, leading to a false alarm about a gas leak. Now that's power. Preservation, of course, is key to the story of dairy. Before refrigeration, keeping milk from spoiling was a constant challenge. Fermentation, as we mentioned, was a game changer. But so was drying, salting, and even smoking. Think of hard cheeses like Parmesan or Pecorino Romano. Their low moisture content and high salt content make them incredibly durable, capable of lasting for months, even years. Or consider the nomadic tribes of Central Asia, who learned to make arrowal, a rock-hard, sun-dried cheese curd that could sustain them on long journeys across the steppes. It might not sound appetizing to you right now, but when you're facing starvation, a chunk of air will probably seems like ambrosia. You shift your weight, the thought of sun-baked cheese curds not quite hitting the spot. You need something sweeter. Something ice creamy. You imagine the cool, smooth texture of vanilla ice cream melting on your tongue, the sweet, creamy flavor a welcome relief. Ice cream, a relatively modern invention, is a testament to our ability to harness technology to improve upon nature. Although, of course, frozen desserts have existed in various forms for centuries. Roman emperors supposedly sent slaves to the mountains to collect snow and ice, which was then flavored with fruit and honey. That's some serious dedication to dessert. But back to modern ice cream. You realize that there's a certain magic in taking something as basic as milk and cream, adding sugar and flavorings, and then subjecting it to a precisely controlled freezing process. It's both science and art, the perfect marriage of technique and taste. Historians still argue whether the modern ice cream was invented in Europe or China, but, let's be honest, does it really matter? What matters is that it exists, a sweet, comforting treat that transcends cultural boundaries. And then there's yogurt. A tangy, slightly sour delight that's both delicious and incredibly good for you. You might be swirling a spoonful of Greek yogurt into your morning granola right now. Or maybe you prefer the sweet, creamy indulgence of a flavored yogurt parfait. Either way, you're benefiting from the power of probiotics, those friendly bacteria that help keep your gut happy and healthy. Yogurt has been around for millennia, with evidence suggesting that it was first made in Mesopotamia around 5000 BC. Imagine, ancient shepherds, observing the natural fermentation of milk in their leather pouches, unwittingly creating one of the world's healthiest foods. You pause, contemplating the sheer ingenuity of our ancestors. They didn't have fancy lab equipment or a deep understanding of microbiology. They just had observation, experimentation, and a willingness to try new things, even if those things were probably a little funky. And who knows, maybe one of those ancient experiments went horribly wrong, resulting in something so repulsive that it was immediately discarded. But hey, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, or, in this case, you can't invent cheese without making a few truly terrible batches of curdled milk. You think about the diversity of dairy products around the world. From the creamy lassi of India to the tangy kefir of Eastern Europe, each culture has developed its own unique ways of transforming milk into something special. There's even kumis, a fermented mare's milk that's a staple drink in Central Asia. You can imagine the taste, or perhaps you can't, as a beverage that is not for the faint of heart. It's slightly alcoholic, slightly sour, and definitely acquired. The quirky tidbit about kumis is that it's traditionally served in a bowl called a toback, which is often made from wood or leather. Drinking kumis from a toback is a sign of respect and hospitality. The world of dairy is also not without its controversies. The ethical treatment of dairy animals is a major concern for many people, as it should be. The environmental impact of dairy farming is another significant issue. From greenhouse gas emissions to water pollution, the dairy industry has a considerable footprint. Navigating these complexities requires careful consideration, informed choices, and a willingness to support sustainable practices. It's all a bit complicated, isn't it? Speaking of complications, let's not forget about lactose intolerance. For a significant portion of the population, dairy is not a source of joy, but rather a source of discomfort. It's a cruel twist of fate, really. To be tantalized by the creamy goodness of cheese and ice cream, only to be betrayed by your own digestive system. But hey, at least there are plenty of lactose-free alternatives these days. From almond milk to coconut yogurt, there's something for everyone. You might even be sipping on some oat milk right now. And it's pretty good, isn't it? Dare I say, almost as good as the real thing? Don't at me, dairy purists. But let's lighten the mood with a dairy-themed joke, shall we? Why did the cheese go to therapy? Because it felt grated. I know, it's terrible. But hey, You can't say I didn't warn you about the dad jokes. You feel a gentle breeze on your face, carrying with it the faint scent of wildflowers and manure. It's a reminder of the natural cycle, the interconnectedness of life. The cows graze on the grass, they produce milk, we transform that milk into a myriad of delicious products, and then, well, everything goes back to the earth eventually. It's all a bit humbling, isn't it? You pause, taking a deep breath. The sun is beginning to set, casting long shadows across the pasture. The cows are slowly making their way back to the barn, their gentle mooing echoing in the twilight. You feel a sense of peace, a sense of connection to something ancient and enduring. Even if you have a love-hate relationship with dairy, you have to admit, it's played a pretty significant role in human history. And it's not going anywhere anytime soon. Unless, of course, scientists manage to perfect lab-grown milk. Now that would be something, wouldn't it? A future where dairy is no longer dependent on cows, but rather on bioreactors and genetically engineered microorganisms. It's a thought that's both exciting and slightly unsettling. But hey, that's progress, right? The cows are all safely tucked away in the barn now. The air is cooler, the shadows deeper. It's time to head back inside, maybe treat yourself to a glass of warm milk, lactose-free, of course, if you need it, and a good book. Or maybe just curl up on the couch and drift off to sleep. Because let's be honest, all this talk of cheese and yogurt and fermented mare's milk has made you incredibly sleepy. Sweet dreams, and may your digestive system be ever in your favor. I still haven't finished, so I cannot wish you a good night yet. Alright, pull up a stool, friend. Let's talk about eggs. Yeah, eggs. You're probably thinking, eggs? What's so special about eggs? Well, back in the medieval peasants' world, eggs weren't exactly the breakfast staple you're used to. Think of them more like tiny, fragile, yolky jewels. Imagine this, you trudge through the muddy fields, the damp chill seeping into your thin leather shoes. The sun, a pale disk behind a thick layer of clouds, offers little warmth. You've been harvesting turnips since dawn, your back aching, your stomach growling. What you really crave is a bit of meat, maybe a hunk of cheese, but those are luxuries for the lord of the manor, not for you. So, what's a peasant to do? Well, if you're lucky, really lucky, you might find an egg. Finding an egg was like discovering a small fortune. And why? Because protein, my friend, was hard to come by. Your daily diet consisted mostly of grains, barley, rye, maybe some oats, with the aforementioned turnips, cabbages, and other root vegetables thrown in for good measure. Delicious? Probably not. Nutritious? It kept you alive. But protein? That was the key to strength, to surviving the back-breaking labor that defined your life. And that's where the humble egg comes in. So, you finally find one. Nestled warm under a grumpy hen, she eyes you suspiciously. It's probably best not to anger her, she could peck your eye out. Seriously. Chickens were important, valuable, egg-laying machines. You gently lift the egg. Feel its smooth, cool surface. It's perfect. You carefully place it in your basket, already envisioning the possibilities. Now, you might be thinking, okay, great, one egg. What's the big deal? But remember, eggs weren't mass-produced back then. We're not talking about factory farms cranking out millions of eggs a day. Each egg was a precious gift, a small miracle of nature. Chickens weren't primarily raised for eggs, they were raised for, well, eventually, meat. Laying eggs was more of a side hustle, a bonus. And even then, hens didn't lay eggs every single day. They were seasonal layers, primarily producing during the warmer months when there was more daylight and better food. Historians still argue whether the average peasant even ate eggs regularly. Some believe they were reserved for special occasions, like Easter or Christmas, or used as payment for services rendered to the Lord. Imagine that, I'll fix your cartwheel if you give me 3 eggs. That's medieval bartering at its finest. Others argue that peasants kept a few chickens specifically for egg production, supplementing their meager diets whenever possible. It's hard to say for sure, but one thing's certain, when you did get your hands on an egg, you savored it. And how did you prepare this glorious prize? Forget your omelets and frittatas. Most likely, you hard-boiled it. It was the safest way to preserve it, at least for a little while. Or maybe you fried it in a bit of rendered animal fat, if you were lucky enough to have any. Can you imagine? The sizzle, the aroma, pure peasant heaven. Maybe you even mixed it into a thin broth of vegetables, enriching the flavor and adding a much-needed protein boost. Quirky tidbit time, did you know that in some medieval folklore, eggs were believed to have magical properties? Some people thought they could ward off evil spirits, predict the future, or even cure certain ailments. Imagine cracking an egg over someone's head to get rid of a headache. Talk about a yolky remedy. Now, let's not forget about the hens themselves. Chickens in the Middle Ages were different. They weren't the plump, docile birds you see today. They were often smaller, tougher, and much more adept at fending for themselves. They roamed freely, scavenging for food, and were generally much wilder than their modern counterparts. Some historical records even mention chickens that could fly, a little bit. Picture that, tiny, feathery dragons terrorizing the village gardens. And another historical fact for you. The Domesday Book, that massive survey of England compiled in 1086, actually recorded the number of chickens owned by various landowners. It's like the medieval version of a census, but with more poultry. Think about it, William the Conqueror, after seizing the throne, was that interested in knowing how many chickens his new subjects possessed. Priorities, right? But back to you, holding your precious egg. You carefully bring it back to your humble dwelling. It's a one-room hut, shared with your family and maybe a few farm animals. The walls are made of wattle and daub, the roof thatched with straw. Not exactly the Ritz, but it's home. You hide the egg, probably in a hole in the floor, hoping your younger siblings don't find it first. Kids, right? Always after your treasure. Now, here's the modern aside. You're probably thinking, okay, this all sounds pretty miserable. I'm glad I live in the 21st century where I can get a carton of eggs for, like, $2. And you'd be right. But it's important to remember that our ancestors lived very different lives, with very different priorities. They appreciated things we take for granted, like a simple egg, because they knew how scarce and valuable it was. We can learn something from that, can't we? Alright, joke time. What do you call a chicken crossing the road? Poultry in motion. Okay, I know, I can do better. What did the egg say to the boiling water? It's going to take me a while to get hard, I just got laid this morning. Sorry, was that too much? Before you start thinking about chickens laying golden eggs, let's talk about what happens to the hen. You know, when it's time for chicken dinner, even for the lord of the land. See, even though those noble types feasted on roasted boars and swans, they still knew the value of a good chicken. Poultry was a relatively accessible source of meat, especially compared to larger livestock like cattle or pigs, which were more valuable and represented a bigger investment. So, while you might not have enjoyed chicken every day, the local lord probably did, at least a few times a week. Talk about food envy. The average life of a peasant wasn't exactly a picnic, but it also wasn't devoid of joy or community. Feasts and festivals provided opportunities for celebration and revelry, a chance to forget the hardships of daily life, at least for a little while. And guess what was often on the menu at these gatherings? You guessed it, eggs. Maybe not in their pure, unadulterated form, but as ingredients in pies, custards, or other delicacies. Imagine the excitement of finally tasting something rich and flavorful after months of monotonous meals. That's what I call a party. Of course, there were also downsides to relying on eggs as a food source. Salmonella, anyone? Food poisoning was a constant threat in the Middle Ages, and poorly handled eggs were a common culprit. hygiene wasn't exactly a top priority back then. So, while an egg could be a lifesaver, it could also be a life ender. Now, a quirky, fringe tidbit. There's evidence to show that some medieval cooks used egg whites as a kind of glue. Seriously. They mixed them with flour and water to create a paste that could be used to seal pastries or even repair broken pottery. Talk about a multi-purpose ingredient. Bet your store-bought super glue can't do that. But back to your hypothetical egg. You've hidden it, protected it, and finally, the day arrives when you decide to eat it. Maybe you're sick, maybe you're weak, maybe you just need a little boost. Whatever the reason, you crack the egg, cook it carefully, and savor every single bite. It's not just food, it's sustenance, it's hope, it's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always something to be grateful for. One last joke. Why did the Scarecrow win an award? Because he was outstanding in his field. I crack myself up. Alright, settle in, settle in. Let's keep this little history train chugging along, shall we? We're diving deeper into the peasant experience. Last time, we got down and dirty with the daily grind and their surprisingly varied diet of grains, veggies, and the odd surprise. This time, we're talking meat. Or, more accurately, the decided lack of it. Imagine your average peasant, right? You're up before dawn, the chills seeping through your threadbare tunic despite the questionable insulation of your straw mattress. You're fueled by a hunk of black bread that could double as a weapon and maybe some watery ale if you're lucky. You're toiling in the fields all day, every day. You're hungry. Like, truly, deeply, hangry. Now, what do you crave? A juicy, succulent, perfectly roasted carrot? Nah. You crave meat. Red, delicious, protein-packed meat. But here's the thing. For the vast majority of peasants throughout the medieval period and even later, meat wasn't a dietary staple. It wasn't even a regular treat. It was a luxury. A special occasion kind of thing. Think Christmas, a wedding, a harvest festival, the kind of events that happened maybe once or twice a year, if you were particularly blessed by the fickle gods of fate and feudalism. It's like waiting for a limited edition Funko Pop to be released. The anticipation is real, and the satisfaction, however fleeting, is divine. So, what kind of meat are we talking about? Well, beef was almost entirely off the table. Cows were valuable. They pulled plows, provided milk, which could be turned into cheese, and represented a significant investment. Slaughtering a cow for a random Tuesday lunch would be like setting fire to your retirement fund. Not a smart move, even if that retirement fund involved a rickety cart and a patch of slightly less rocky land. Instead, the most common meat for peasants was pork. Now, pork might not sound that glamorous in our age of artisanal bacon and pulled pork sandwiches, but back then, it was a big deal. Pigs were relatively easy to raise. They ate, well, pretty much anything, which was a bonus when you lived in a time when food waste was a foreign concept because you used everything. And crucially, they multiplied. Quickly. A pig could become a feast relatively quickly. It's like the medieval version of a fast food franchise, only it takes, a year instead of 5 minutes. Most peasant families kept at least one pig. It would forage around the village, fattening itself up on scraps and whatever it could find. Come autumn, when the weather started to turn, it would be slaughtered, and every single part of it would be used. Nothing wasted. The meat would be salted and smoked to preserve it, stretching it out to last as long as possible. The lard would be rendered for cooking. Even the bristles were used for making brushes. It's like a masterclass in resourcefulness, something we could probably learn a thing or two from today, huh? There's a delightful, if slightly gruesome, illustration I remember seeing of the November pig, where a plump swine is being cheerfully marched to the slaughter. You can practically hear it squealing its little pig heart out. Then, there was game. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so peasants could just go hunting, right? Free meat. Wrong. Hunting was generally restricted to the nobility. It was their right, their privilege, their sport. Poaching was a serious offense, punishable by fines, imprisonment, or, in extreme cases, even death. The forests weren't some free-for-all buffet, they were the carefully managed playgrounds of the wealthy. Think of it as a medieval gated community, but instead of a homeowners association, you had armed guards and deadly traps. However, that didn't stop some peasants from, shall we say, supplementing their diet with the occasional rabbit, bird, or even a deer if they were particularly brave, or foolish. Snares and traps were common, and a skilled poacher could provide his family with a welcome boost of protein without attracting too much attention. It was a risky business, though. Getting caught could have dire consequences. Historians still argue whether poaching was a widespread practice that significantly impacted peasant diets, or whether it was more of an occasional, desperate measure taken by a select few. But the allure of forbidden meat, the thrill of the hunt, well, it's easy to see why some peasants were willing to take the risk. The type of game available varied depending on the region, of course. Deer were prized, but difficult to catch. Rabbits were more common. Birds, like pigeons and partridges, were also popular targets. And let's not forget the humble hedgehog. Apparently, roasted hedgehog was considered a delicacy in some areas. Imagine that sizzling on a spit, a crispy, prickly treat. Don't worry, they removed the quills first. I think. Now, here's a quirky little tidbit for you. In some regions, peasants were allowed to keep chickens, not just for their eggs, but also for their meat. Chickens were seen as more of a peasant animal, and while lords might enjoy a roasted chicken on occasion, they weren't as fiercely protective of them as they were of deer. But you know what's even quirkier? There were laws in some places dictating how many chickens a peasant could own. Can you imagine the bureaucratic nightmare of chicken census takers? Excuse me, sir, how many hens do you currently possess? And are they laying consistently? We need to verify these numbers for tax purposes. But even if you managed to bag a rabbit or had a flock of chickens, meat was still a relatively small part of the average peasant's diet. Most meals consisted of grains, vegetables, and whatever else they could scrounge up. Meat was a treat, a reward, a symbol of celebration. It represented a break from the monotony of their daily lives, a small indulgence in a world of hardship. And let's be honest, even that treat probably wasn't exactly the kind of gourmet experience we might imagine. Forget perfectly marbled steaks and dry-aged cuts. Peasant meat was likely to be tough, stringy, and, let's just say, flavorful. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of gas station sushi, edible, technically, but not exactly something you'd write home about. Speaking of writing, here's a mainstream historical fact to chew on: the Black Death in the 14th century actually led to a temporary increase in meat consumption among the surviving peasants. With so many people dying, there was suddenly more land and resources available. This led to higher wages for laborers and a greater ability to afford meat. It's a grim reminder that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, there can be unexpected and sometimes perverse consequences. It's like finding a $20 bill on the sidewalk right after your house burns down. You're still devastated, but, hey, free money. Now, back to that succulent, slightly questionable peasant meat. How did they actually cook it? Well, roasting was a common method, especially for larger cuts. A pig or a deer could be roasted whole over an open fire, providing a feast for the entire village. Boiling was also popular, particularly for tougher cuts of meat. Boiling it for hours, with a generous helping of herbs and vegetables, could help to tenderize it and make it more palatable. Think of it as the medieval version of a slow cooker, only without the electricity and the modern convenience of a programmable timer. One-pot stews were also a staple. These hearty concoctions would contain whatever meat was available, along with grains, vegetables, and whatever else could be thrown in. It's like a medieval garbage disposal, but instead of going down the drain, it goes into your stomach. And here's a slightly unsettling, but historically accurate, fact: spices were highly prized and often used to disguise the taste of less than fresh meat. Yeah, that's right. If your meat was starting to smell a little funky, you could just cover it in enough ginger and cloves to mask the odor. It's like the medieval equivalent of using Febreze on your questionable leftovers. It really is a testament to the human capacity for resilience, isn't it? Toiling endlessly, barely scraping by, yet still finding ways to celebrate and enjoy the occasional small pleasure. That bite of roasted pork, the satisfaction of a successful hunt, the communal feast, these moments provided a fleeting glimpse of joy in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. And perhaps that's what made them so precious. The scarcity of meat made it all the more special. Like a rare flower blooming in a field of weeds. So, next time you're sitting down to a plate of perfectly grilled steak, take a moment to appreciate the sheer abundance that we often take for granted. Think about the countless generations of peasants who would have given anything for just a small taste of what you have. And maybe, just maybe, consider sharing a bit of that good fortune with someone who could use it. Or, just enjoy your steak. You've earned it. And with that, let's pause right here. Alright, settle in, friend. Get comfy. Maybe grab a blanket. Today, we're diving headfirst into the delectable world of fruits and nuts, those seasonal treats that sustained our ancestors and continue to tantalize our taste buds today. We're going to explore the bounty available to you, and how, back in the day, you'd ensure that bounty lasted beyond the harvest season. Think of it as a culinary time machine, seasoned with a dash of gentle sarcasm and a whole lot of, well, let's just say, information. Imagine yourself in late summer. The air is thick with the sweet perfume of ripening berries. You trudge through a sun-dappled orchard, the leaves rustling a gentle lullaby. Overhead, branches laden with apples and pears grown under their own weight. You reach up, pluck a ripe apple, and take a bite. The juice bursts onto your tongue, a sweet tart explosion of pure, unadulterated goodness. It's moments like these that make all the hard work worthwhile, right? You can almost hear the crickets chirping, can't you? The birds are, totally on board with this fruit situation. But what kinds of fruits were even available? Well, that depended heavily on your location. In the Mediterranean, you'd be spoiled for choice with figs, grapes, olives, and pomegranates. Further north, apples, pears, plums, cherries, and a plethora of berries reigned supreme. Consider the humble apple. Did you know that the Romans were practically apple-obsessed? They cultivated numerous varieties and even developed techniques for grafting, essentially creating designer apples long before the iPhone. They also used apples in a variety of dishes, both sweet and savory, and even brewed a kind of cider. Talk about commitment. And speaking of commitment, ever thought about the wild ancestors of the fruits we enjoy today? Fringe tidbit time. Some scientists believe that the ancestor of the modern apple was a tiny, sour crabapple found in Central Asia. Talk about a glow-up. It's kind of like discovering that your favorite celebrity used to be a shy, awkward kid. Gives you hope, doesn't it? And, look at you now, friend. Glowing up, eating apples. Now, picture a crisp autumn day. The leaves are turning vibrant shades of red, orange, and gold. You're gathering nuts, acorns, chestnuts, walnuts, hazelnuts, preparing for the colder months ahead. Squirrels dart around you, busily burying their own caches. You eye them with a mixture of amusement and envy. Seriously, how do they remember where they put all those nuts? It's a superpower, I swear. Nuts provided essential fats, protein, and calories, especially crucial during winter. Acorns, while abundant, required significant processing to remove their tannins, making them palatable. This usually involved leaching them in water for days, a process that must have been incredibly tedious. I mean, can you imagine the Pinterest fails that would come from people trying that today? Honey, I followed the recipe exactly, but my acorns taste like sadness. Interestingly, some historical accounts suggest that in certain cultures, walnuts were considered a symbol of intelligence. The kernel's resemblance to the human brain apparently fueled this association. So, next time you crack open a walnut, remember, you're basically unlocking a tiny, edible brain. Okay, maybe don't think too hard about that. It's getting a little weird, isn't it? And, just like fruits, the types of nuts available varied depending on your geographic location. Chestnuts were prized in Europe and Asia, while pecans and hickory nuts were native to North America. Historians still argue whether the widespread cultivation of certain nut varieties was a result of deliberate selection and propagation by humans or simply a consequence of natural dispersal and adaptation. It's a question that probably keeps some academics up at night. I can just picture them, huddled in their offices, fueled by lukewarm coffee and existential dread, pondering the fate of the humble hazelnut. Alright, let's get down to the nitty-gritty, preservation. Because, let's face it, gorging yourself on fresh fruit and nuts is fun, but you can't exactly live on apple crisp and walnut pie for 9 months of the year. You needed to find ways to make your harvest last. One of the most common methods was drying. You could spread fruits and nuts out in the sun, or use a low oven or dehydrator, or a specialized smoking rack, to remove the moisture. Dried fruits like raisins, figs, and apricots could last for months, providing a concentrated source of sweetness and energy. Nuts, too, could be dried and stored for extended periods, though they were often susceptible to pests. Picture yourself carefully laying out thin slices of apple on a rack, the sun warming your face. It's relaxing, isn't it? Unless you're being swarmed by fruit flies, of course. Then it's just a special kind of hell. Another technique was pickling or preserving fruits in vinegar or honey. This not only extended their shelf life but also added a unique flavor dimension. Imagine pickled peaches, or cherries preserved in honey. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? You could also make jams and jellies, using the natural pectin in fruits to create a thick, spreadable preserve. Fermentation was another powerful tool. Think of sauerkraut, kimchi, or even fruit wines and ciders. These methods not only preserved food but also transformed it, creating new flavors and textures. Fermentation is a process where microorganisms, like bacteria or yeast, break down sugars and carbohydrates in food, producing acids, gases, or alcohol as byproducts. These byproducts can inhibit the growth of other spoilage organisms, extending the shelf life of the food. Plus, a good bottle of hard cider on a cold winter night. That's a surefire way to keep the spirits up. Here's a fun little historical tidbit: salt cellars, which were small containers for salt, were highly prized possessions in many cultures. Salt was an essential preservative, used to cure meats, preserve vegetables, and of course, flavor food. Having a well-stocked salt cellar was a sign of wealth and status. Imagine the drama if you ran out of salt. The horror. It'd be like running out of phone battery at a music festival. And speaking of running out of things, what about running out of air? While canning as we know it today wasn't widespread until the 19th century, rudimentary forms of airtight storage existed before that. People would pack fruits and vegetables in jars or containers, then seal them with wax or fat to prevent spoilage. It wasn't foolproof, but it was better than nothing. Imagine your disappointment when you open a jar of what you hoped was delicious preserved plums, only to find a moldy, vinegary mess. Talk about a mood killer. Now, here's a quirky one: some cultures believe that burying food in the ground could help preserve it. The cool, stable temperatures underground could slow down spoilage. Of course, this also meant digging up your food later, which could be a challenge, especially in the winter. Honey, where did we bury the turnips again? Was it near the oak tree or the, oh, wait, everything's covered in snow? Historians still debate whether some of these preservation methods were truly effective or simply offered a marginal improvement over letting food rot completely. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. These weren't perfect solutions, but they were the best that people had at the time. It's a testament to human ingenuity and resilience that they were able to find ways to survive and thrive, even in the face of scarcity. So there you have it, friend. A glimpse into the world of fruits and nuts, seasonal treats and preservation techniques of yesteryear. It's a reminder that even in our modern world of supermarkets and instant gratification, there's still something deeply satisfying about connecting with the natural world and appreciating the bounty that it provides. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I need a snack. Maybe some dried apricots and a handful of walnuts. Don't forget to bury the extra under a nearby oak tree. I'm just kidding, mostly. Alright, come closer, let's get cozy. You've been subsisting on a diet that, well, let's just call it beige, shall we? Oatmeal for breakfast, boiled chicken for lunch, maybe some steamed broccoli for dinner if you're feeling particularly wild. You're starting to dream in shades of off-white. Don't worry, friend. I'm here to rescue your taste buds from culinary purgatory. We're diving headfirst into the vibrant, aromatic world of herbs and spices. Think of me as your own personal spice merchant, whispering secrets of flavor directly into your ear, in the least creepy way possible, of course. You reach out, and I press a small, fragrant bundle into your hand. It's rosemary. Close your eyes and inhale deeply. The piney scent transports you to a sun-drenched hillside, doesn't it? Rosemary, you see, isn't just for making your roasted chicken marginally less depressing. It's an ancient herb, revered for centuries. The ancient Greeks believed it improved memory, so they wore it in their hair while studying. Now, I'm not suggesting you show up to your next exam looking like a well-seasoned shrub, but hey, no harm in trying, right? Fun fact, some people believe that rosemary would only grow well in gardens tended by dominant women. I picture a bunch of Victorian matriarchs, armed with trowels and steely gazes, ensuring their rosemary bushes flourished. Historians still argue whether this belief stemmed from a genuine observation of rosemary's growing habits or was simply a reflection of societal power dynamics. Next, I offer you a pinch of saffron. It's ridiculously expensive, I know, but a little goes a long way. Did you know that saffron is the world's most expensive spice, derived from the Crocus sativus flower? Each flower produces only 3 stigmas, which must be hand-picked and dried. That's why it costs more than your car. It takes roughly 14,000 threads to produce a single kilogram. The aroma is intoxicating, a subtle blend of floral and earthy notes. You taste it, a slightly bitter, yet strangely sweet sensation dances on your tongue. Saffron has been used for millennia, not just as a spice, but also as a dye and a medicine. Cleopatra, known for her extravagant habits, supposedly bathed in saffron-infused milk to enhance her beauty. Talk about living large. On a slightly less glamorous note, there's a quirky fringe theory that claims saffron can induce prophetic dreams. So, if you suddenly start predicting the lottery numbers after adding saffron to your paella, you know who to thank, or blame. Now, let's turn up the heat a bit. Here, sample this tiny sliver of chili pepper. Careful, it's got a kick. That burning sensation is caused by capsaicin, a chemical compound that tricks your brain into thinking you're actually on fire. It's a pleasant fire, though, right? No. Well, you'll get used to it. The chili pepper originated in the Americas and was introduced to the rest of the world by Christopher Columbus. Yes, that Columbus. The guy who was supposedly looking for a faster route to India and instead stumbled upon an entire continent and a whole lot of spicy goodness. Maybe he was just really, really bad at directions. The Maya used chili peppers not only in food but also as a weapon. They would hurl chili-filled projectiles at their enemies. Talk about adding insult to injury. Imagine getting pepper sprayed centuries before pepper spray was even invented. Ginger is next. I hand you a small piece of the knobbly root. Its warm, spicy aroma fills your nostrils. Ginger has been used in traditional medicine for centuries, particularly in Asian cultures, to treat nausea, digestive issues, and inflammation. You sip some ginger tea. It soothes your stomach, doesn't it? It's also said to be good for motion sickness, so maybe keep some handy for your next turbulent plane ride. There's a long-held belief that ginger can boost your libido. Well, let's just say, if you're looking to spice things up in the bedroom, you might want to consider adding a little ginger to the menu. Although, perhaps consult your partner first. Now, ginger can also have negative side effects depending on the individual, so do a little research first before you chomp down on a whole root. Historians still argue whether ginger's medicinal properties are primarily due to its active compounds or to the placebo effect associated with traditional remedies. Next, I reach for the cinnamon. The sweet, comforting scent of cinnamon evokes images of cozy fireplaces and holiday baking. You take a deep breath and feel instantly relaxed. Cinnamon is derived from the bark of cinnamon trees, native to Sri Lanka. For centuries, it was a highly valued spice, used in ancient Egypt for embalming and in medieval Europe as a status symbol. You see, a medieval baron would sprinkle it on his pheasant, and people would think, wow, he must be really important. The Egyptians took cinnamon very seriously. There's a fringe theory that suggests they used it in some kind of ancient anti-aging cream. I mean, who wouldn't want to smell like a cinnamon bun all the time? Consider the humble garlic. You might think of it as just a pungent addition to your spaghetti sauce, but it's so much more than that. You crush a clove between your fingers, releasing its potent aroma. Garlic has been used for both culinary and medicinal purposes for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptians fed it to the pyramid builders to keep them strong and healthy. Talk about performance-enhancing food. Garlic has also been associated with warding off vampires. I'm not saying you should go around wearing garlic cloves around your neck, but it couldn't hurt, right? Unless, of course, you're trying to attract vampires. Some folks believe that placing garlic under your pillow will bring about prophetic dreams. Well, that's certainly one way to ensure you have vivid dreams, although your partner might not appreciate your newfound sleeping habits. Let's not forget about turmeric. Its vibrant yellow color is a feast for the eyes. Turmeric contains curcumin, a compound with powerful anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. You stir a spoonful into your warm milk, creating a golden elixir that promises to soothe your body and mind. Turmeric has been used in traditional Ayurvedic medicine for centuries to treat a variety of ailments. It's also used as a natural dye. In fact, there's a slightly amusing story about a turmeric dye mishap involving a medieval tapestry which now features a very peculiar shade of goldenrod. Historians still debate whether turmeric's benefits are as extensive as claimed by traditional medicine or if further research is needed to fully understand its effects. Now, let's bring in the nutmeg. That warm, nutty aroma, so comforting, so fallish. Nutmeg comes from the seed of the nutmeg tree, native to the Spice Islands of Indonesia. During the 17th century, nutmeg was incredibly valuable, and the Dutch East India Company famously fought wars to control its production. One little nutmeg seed could be worth more than a house. Now that's what I call high-stakes spice trading. In small doses, nutmeg is perfectly safe and delicious. However, in large quantities, it can have hallucinogenic effects. I am not suggesting you try to get high on nutmeg. Trust me, it's not worth it. The side effects are unpleasant, and the taste is, well, let's just say you'd be better off sticking to, other things. A more wholesome idea, however, is to grind a little nutmeg into your eggnog. Finally, I offer you a sprig of mint. The refreshing scent instantly awakens your senses. You chew on a leaf, and a cool, invigorating sensation washes over you. Mint has been used for centuries to freshen breath and aid digestion. The Romans used to wear mint wreaths at feasts, believing it would prevent them from getting too drunk. Now that's what I call a practical accessory. There's a belief that mint brings wealth and prosperity. So, plant some in your garden and watch your bank account magically grow, or, just enjoy the refreshing taste. I can't promise instant riches, sadly. So, there you have it. A whirlwind tour through the wonderful world of herbs and spices. You've tasted, you've smelled, you've learned a few quirky facts along the way. Now, go forth and spice up your life. Because, let's be honest, beige is so last season. Alright, gather round, settle in, because we're diving deep, or maybe just wading ankle deep, into the murky, yet surprisingly crucial, topic of medieval drinks. Specifically, we're talking ale, cider, and, of course, good old H2O. Now, I know what you're thinking, water. Really? That's thrilling. But trust me, even something as basic as hydration gets a fascinating medieval twist. Just breathe, relax those shoulders. We'll get through this together. So, picture this, you're a medieval peasant. Or a knight. Or, heck, even a particularly thirsty pigeon. Whatever your station, you're probably feeling parched. And before you reach for that perfectly chilled bottle of sparkling water with a hint of lemon, because, let's be honest, that's what I'm craving right now, you need to understand your medieval beverage options. And spoiler alert, they're not exactly brimming with antioxidants and electrolytes. First up, let's talk about ale. Ah, ale. The lifeblood of the medieval masses. The fuel of festivals and the solace of weary travelers. Seriously, ale was everywhere. And I do mean everywhere. It was consumed more often than water, and that's not just because everyone back then was a secret lush, although, some probably were. The big reason behind this was safety. You see, back in those days, water sources weren't exactly known for their pristine cleanliness. Think open sewers, questionable hygiene practices, and a general lack of understanding about germ theory. A truly delightful cocktail of potential ailments. So, what did they do? They brewed ale. The process of brewing involves boiling water, which effectively kills off most of the harmful bacteria. Plus, the alcohol content, however minimal, provided an extra layer of protection. It wasn't exactly sterile, mind you. We're not talking about a modern pasteurization process here. But it was significantly safer than chugging straight from the nearest well, which might also contain a stray sock or two. Now, don't go imagining potent, hoppy IPAs. Medieval ale was a far cry from the craft beers we know and love today. It was often a thin, weak brew, more akin to a slightly alcoholic broth than a proper pint. It was usually flavored with whatever herbs and spices were available, things like grut, a mixture of herbs like bog myrtle, yarrow, and heather, which predates the use of hops. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of ale significantly contributed to the lower life expectancy of the time, or if it was just one factor in a complex web of sanitation issues and other factors. I think it was the stray socks. And ale wasn't just a beverage, it was a social lubricant. Village gatherings, market days, even business transactions often involved copious amounts of ale. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of office coffee breaks, but with a slightly higher risk of public brawling and spontaneous sing-alongs. And, potential dysentery. Moving on to cider. Cider, the slightly more refined cousin of ale. Well, refined might be a bit of an overstatement. But it certainly held a certain cachet, especially in regions with abundant apple orchards, like the west of England and parts of France. Cider was made by pressing apples, and fermenting the juice. And just like ale, the fermentation process helped to kill off some of the nasties lurking in the apples and their juice. Interestingly, cider was often viewed as a more civilized drink than ale. It was frequently associated with the upper classes and was a staple at feasts and celebrations. Think of it as the medieval champagne, without the bubbles or the exorbitant price tag. Although, a particularly fine vintage of cider could certainly fetch a pretty penny. Fun fact, apple trees were so highly valued in some areas that they were even used as boundary markers. Imagine arguing with your neighbor over the property line and settling it with a shared pint of cider made from the disputed tree. Ah, simpler times. Cider, like ale, came in various strengths and flavors. Some were sweet and fruity, while others were dry and tart. And just like today, different regions had their own unique cider-making traditions. In some areas, they even added spices and herbs to their cider, creating unique and flavorful concoctions. And while most ciders were made from apples, you could also find ciders made from pears, called perry, or other fruits. However, don't think that cider was all about refined enjoyment. In many rural areas, it was a staple drink for laborers and farmers. It provided a source of hydration and energy, and was often consumed in large quantities throughout the day. And, let's be honest, a little bit of alcohol probably helped to ease the aches and pains of a hard day's work. And now, for the unsung hero of medieval hydration, water. Yes, you heard me right. Water. It might not be as exciting as ale or cider, but it was, nonetheless, essential for survival. However, as we've already established, medieval water sources weren't exactly the cleanest. Rivers, wells, and streams were often contaminated with sewage, animal waste, and other unpleasant substances. So, how did people get their water? Well, they relied on a variety of sources. Some villages had communal wells, which were dug deep into the ground to access groundwater. Others relied on rivers and streams, although they were often aware of the risks involved. Rainwater harvesting was also practiced, although it wasn't always reliable. Seriously, imagine relying on rainwater in medieval England. You'd be perpetually thirsty. Interestingly, medieval people weren't entirely oblivious to the dangers of contaminated water. They understood that certain water sources were more likely to cause illness than others. They also knew that boiling water could make it safer to drink. However, boiling water required fuel, which wasn't always readily available. So, they often relied on other methods of purification, such as filtering water through sand or charcoal. But, let's be real, these methods weren't exactly foolproof. So, people often tried to avoid drinking water whenever possible. This is why ale and cider were so popular. They were simply safer options. It wasn't that people were particularly fond of being tipsy all the time, although, some probably were, it was just a matter of survival. It's also why small beer, a super weak version of ale, was so common. Now, I bet you're wondering, what about the rich folk? Surely they had better access to clean water, right? Well, sort of. The wealthy certainly had access to better wells and more sophisticated water filtration systems. They could afford to have their water transported from cleaner sources, and they often had servants dedicated to ensuring the cleanliness of their water supply. But even they weren't immune to the risks of waterborne illness. After all, a leaky pipe or a careless servant could easily contaminate their water supply. Historians still argue whether medieval water infrastructure, especially in cities, was more sophisticated than commonly believed, or if it was simply a matter of luck that prevented widespread epidemics more often. Perhaps a bit of both. Regardless, one thing is clear, medieval people had to be incredibly careful about where they got their water and how they treated it. And there you have it, a slightly tipsy, slightly morbid, but hopefully informative overview of medieval drinks. So, next time you reach for that perfectly chilled glass of water, take a moment to appreciate the fact that you don't have to worry about contracting dysentery. And maybe raise a glass of ale, cider, or even water, if you're feeling particularly adventurous, to the brave souls of the Middle Ages who navigated the treacherous waters of medieval hydration. And remember, don't drink the water, unless you have to, and then, boil it first. It's good advice for any time, really. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's get comfy. Maybe grab a blanket, a lukewarm cup of tea, because tonight, we're delving into the not-so-comfy topic of famine foods. Yeah, I know, it's not exactly a bedtime story, but trust me, there's a strange kind of, fascinating, grit in the face of human desperation. We're talking survival, pure and simple. The kind of survival that makes you rethink that double cheeseburger you had for lunch. So, you trudge through the parched earth, the sun beating down like a judgmental parent. Your stomach growls, a sound that echoes the emptiness of the landscape around you. The crops failed weeks ago, the livestock are skeletal shadows, and the shelves in the village store are, were bare. You're hungry. Like, really hungry. You've already tightened your belt another notch, and it's starting to chafe. This isn't just missing a meal, this is life or death. This is famine. What do you do? The history books will tell you that famine has been a recurring nightmare throughout human history. The Great Famine of Ireland in the 1840s, the Bengal Famine of 1943, the Holodomor in Ukraine, each one a horrifying testament to the fragility of our food supply and the devastating consequences of its failure. In Ireland, the reliance on a single crop, the potato, proved fatal when blight struck. Makes you think twice about your carb-loading habits, doesn't it? All those fries could be your downfall. Just kidding. Mostly. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, history lesson over. Tell me about the weird stuff. And weird it gets. When faced with starvation, people get creative. Desperate, but creative. Think of it as extreme foraging, with a side of, please don't let this kill me. You start looking at things you wouldn't normally consider edible. Bark, for instance. Yeah, tree bark. Apparently, the inner layer, the cambium, can be stripped and ground into a flour-like substance. It's not exactly a croissant, but it'll fill your belly, eventually. It's also notoriously difficult to digest, so be prepared for some, digestive distress. I guess that's one way to clear a room. Then there are the famine breads. Not your sourdough starter from that lockdown hobby, I assure you. We're talking loaves bulked out with things like sawdust, clay, or even ground-up bones. Now, I know what you're thinking, bones. Seriously? Yes, seriously. Bone meal provides calcium and other minerals, but it's not exactly a palatable ingredient. Imagine explaining that one to your local baker, yeah, I'll take a dozen rolls, extra bone, please. You'd definitely become the talk of the town. Speaking of things you wouldn't normally eat, dandelions. The bane of every suburban lawn, the humble dandelion becomes a dietary staple. The leaves can be eaten raw in salads, bitter, but edible, or cooked like spinach. The roots can be roasted and ground into a coffee substitute. Resourceful. My grandma used to make dandelion wine. I always suspected she knew something we didn't. But famine foods aren't just about plants. When the crops fail, you turn to whatever animals you can find. Rodents become a source of protein. Cats and dogs, well, let's just say pets are not always pets in these situations. And then there are the insects. Grasshoppers, locusts, crickets, all protein-rich and readily available. Though, I'll admit, I'd probably draw the line there. I'm not Bear Grylls, okay? Now, here's a slightly unsettling fact: in some historical famines, cannibalism wasn't unheard of. I know, it's a tough pill to swallow, pun intended. Maybe. During the siege of Leningrad in World War II, for example, starvation was so rampant that instances of cannibalism were documented. It's a truly horrifying reflection of the depths of human desperation. Thankfully, it's relatively rare, but it serves as a stark reminder of the extremes to which people will go to survive. And while we're on the subject of extreme measures, let's talk about bloodletting. No, not for medicinal purposes. During some famines, people would drink the blood of animals, believing it would provide them with nourishment. It's not exactly a nutritious beverage, and it carries a significant risk of disease, but when you're starving, you're willing to try almost anything. Historians still argue whether the availability of alternative food sources significantly mitigated the impact of famines, or whether they were merely stopgap measures that prolonged suffering. Did those dandelions and bone breads really make a difference, or were they just delaying the inevitable? It's a grim question, and one that's difficult to answer definitively. You might be thinking, okay, this is all fascinatingly morbid, but what does it mean for me? Well, hopefully, you'll never have to resort to eating tree bark or grasshoppers. But understanding the lengths people have gone to in the past can give you a new appreciation for the abundance we often take for granted. It can also make you think about food waste in a whole new light. That half-eaten sandwich you tossed in the trash. Someone, somewhere, in another time, might have considered that a feast. Beyond the obvious horrors, the reliance on famine foods also had some unexpected consequences. Some researchers suggest that certain dietary changes during famines led to long-term health problems for those who survived. Malnutrition during critical developmental stages can have lasting effects on physical and cognitive development. So, even if you make it through the famine, the scars can linger for years to come. And let's not forget the social impact. Famines often exacerbate existing inequalities, with the poorest and most vulnerable populations suffering the most. They can also lead to social unrest and even violence, as desperate people fight for dwindling resources. It's a breeding ground for chaos and despair, which, honestly, isn't that surprising. Now, for a brief moment of levity, I once tried making a dandelion salad. Let's just say it tasted like sadness mixed with lawn clippings. I promptly added a generous amount of vinaigrette and some crumbled goat cheese. It still tasted like sadness, but at least it was fancy sadness. Moving on before I trigger any lingering childhood memories of forced greens, another interesting aspect of famine survival is the knowledge passed down through generations. Traditional societies often have a deep understanding of the edible plants and animals in their local environment, knowledge that can be crucial during times of scarcity. That knowledge is disappearing, sadly, as more people move to urban areas and lose touch with the natural world. Maybe it's time we brushed up on our foraging skills, just in case. I've got a story here, completely unverified. A very strange report suggests that during the Irish potato famine, some desperate villagers attempted to consume peat moss. They didn't understand it was largely indigestible and, well, it led to some truly unfortunate blockages. Moral of the story: do your research before you start munching on questionable vegetation. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, hopefully with a full stomach, take a moment to appreciate the food on your plate and the complex systems that bring it to you. Remember the stories of those who faced unimaginable hunger and the extreme measures they took to survive. And maybe, just maybe, consider planting a few dandelions in your yard. You never know when they might come in handy. Sweet dreams. I'm serious. Try not to have nightmares about bone bread, though. Sleep tight. Don't let the bark bugs bite. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's get comfy. Imagine you're a time traveler, except instead of zipping around in a DeLorean, you're being gently nudged through the medieval landscape by, let's say, a really mellow badger. He just wants you to experience the local cuisine. And who are you to deny a badger? You find yourself in a northern village, somewhere around Scandinavia, maybe. The air is crisp, biting even, and the sun feels, well, let's be honest, it feels like it's perpetually on vacation. You trudge through the snow-dusted paths, the crunch under your worn leather boots a surprisingly satisfying sound. The first thing you notice, even before the adorable, albeit slightly pungent, huts, is the smell. Smoky, fishy, and, oddly sweet. You quickly learn that a staple here, as you probably guessed, is fish. Cod, herring, anything that swims and can be readily preserved through smoking, drying, or salting, is on the menu. You see families diligently preparing these staples, ensuring survival through the long, harsh winter. Meat, when available, might be reindeer or elk, carefully hunted and used sparingly. Forget that whole medieval night eating a whole ox thing, that was mostly for the upper crust, and even they wouldn't do it every day. Unless they were particularly obnoxious nights. Grain, usually barley or rye, forms the base of flatbreads or porridge. It's coarse, hearty stuff, designed to stick to your ribs and provide the energy you need for, surviving. Fruits and vegetables are scarce, limited mostly to hardy root vegetables like turnips and the occasional foraged berry during the brief summer months. Milk is a big deal too, from cows, goats, or even reindeer. It's churned into butter, fermented into cheeses, some of which, let's be honest, probably smell like old socks, or drunk straight. You can almost taste the rich, fatty cream coating your tongue. If you're really lucky, you might stumble upon some mead, a honey-based wine, to wash it all down. It's sweet, potent, and will definitely make that conversation with the badger even more interesting. Historians still argue whether the Vikings were actually that fond of mead or if it's been overly romanticized by later sagas. I guess some mysteries are best left, slightly buzzed. Now, that sweet smell you noticed? That could be from honey, which was a precious sweetener. It's so precious that it's a valuable trade commodity. Imagine being excited for honey. Your standards might be low, you might have adapted to low expectations. Let's leave the frigid north and head south, shall we? Imagine the sun warming your skin, the air thick with the scent of herbs and something vaguely floral. You've arrived in the Mediterranean, likely somewhere in Italy or southern France. Gone are the endless fields of snow, you're greeted by terraced hillsides bursting with grapevines, olive groves, and citrus trees. The diet here is dramatically different. Think sunshine in edible form. The Mediterranean diet, even back then, was known for its focus on fresh, seasonal ingredients. Wheat reigns supreme. It's baked into crusty loaves of bread, used to make pasta, yes, pasta, and forms the foundation of many meals. Olive oil is practically a religion. It's drizzled on everything, used for cooking, and even burned in lamps. You see it pressed fresh, the emerald green liquid glistening in the sun. Vegetables like tomatoes, eggplants, and zucchini are abundant, adding vibrant colors and flavors to the local cuisine. And of course, there are fruits. Grapes, figs, pomegranates, and melons are readily available, offering a sweet and refreshing counterpoint to the savory dishes. Now, you might think tomatoes are a given, but here's a fun fact: tomatoes weren't widely adopted in Europe until much later, after their introduction from the Americas. Gasp. People were probably eating bland bread for a long time. Sad. Fish and seafood are also a crucial part of the Mediterranean diet. Fresh catches are grilled, baked, or stewed with herbs and vegetables. You can almost taste the salty tang of the sea on your lips. Meat, while still less common than grain and produce, is more readily available than in the north. Lamb, goat, and pork are enjoyed, often roasted with aromatic herbs like rosemary and thyme. Wine, of course, is the drink of choice. It's a central part of social life, accompanying meals and celebrations. It's also surprisingly safe to drink. Fermentation, you see, kills off a lot of the nasty bacteria that might be lurking in the water supply. Always a plus. A quirkier tidbit: the Romans, who heavily influenced the Mediterranean diet, were obsessed with garum, a fermented fish sauce. It sounds absolutely vile to our modern sensibilities, but apparently, it was considered a culinary delicacy. Historians still argue whether garum was truly as ubiquitous and beloved as ancient sources suggest, or if it's just the ancient equivalent of hypebeast food. Maybe it was the medieval equivalent of sriracha. You may be starting to think you prefer the South, but we need to go back up to England. Let's travel to the heart of Europe, to the misty Isles of Great Britain. You find yourself in a medieval English village. It's damp. There's no other way to put it. The air is thick with moisture, the fields are lush and green, and everything seems to be perpetually covered in a fine layer of dew. You're immediately craving a cup of tea, but alas, that won't arrive for quite some time. The English diet, naturally, reflects its climate. It is, as you might expect, somewhere between the heartiness of the north and the vibrancy of the Mediterranean. Wheat is the primary grain, used to make bread, ale, and pottage, a thick, stew-like concoction that forms the basis of many meals. Think oatmeal, but less refined. Meat is more accessible here than in Scandinavia, especially for those higher up the social ladder. Beef, pork, and mutton are common, often roasted or stewed. Hunting was a popular pastime for the nobility, and game like deer, rabbit, and pheasant were prized delicacies. You might imagine a grand feast laid out on a long wooden table, laden with roasted meats, pies, and flagons of ale. But that was probably only for the king and his very obnoxious knights. Vegetables are limited, but still present. Cabbage, onions, leeks, and beans are grown and used in stews and soups. Fruit, like apples and pears, are available, but often preserved in pies or tarts due to the short growing season. Spices, while increasingly available through trade routes, are still expensive and used sparingly. A pinch of ginger or cinnamon could make a big difference. Ale is the drink of choice in England. It's brewed from barley and flavored with herbs and spices. It's a staple of everyday life, consumed by men, women, and even children, though the alcohol content would have been significantly lower than modern beer. You can practically smell the yeasty, malty aroma wafting from the local tavern. A quirky tidbit: medieval Englishmen were apparently quite fond of hedgehogs. Yes, hedgehogs. They were roasted in clay, spines and all, and eaten as a delicacy. I'm not even kidding. I feel like a good sentence with the badger is coming up. One more thing to know about the medieval English diet is that monks and monasteries played a vital role in shaping culinary practices. They were centers of agricultural innovation, cultivating new crops and refining farming techniques. They were also renowned for their brewing skills, producing some of the finest alesh and wines in the land. Historians still argue whether the influence of monasteries on medieval cuisine was primarily driven by religious devotion or simply by the monks' appreciation for good food and drink. As you can see, the medieval diet was incredibly diverse, shaped by local climates, available resources, and social class. It wasn't just bland bread and gruel, though there was certainly some of that too. It was a complex tapestry of flavors and textures, reflecting the unique character of each region. And who knows, maybe that badger knows of even more exciting flavors. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, remember the humble turnip, the savory garum, and the slightly alarming roasted hedgehog. And maybe, just maybe, dream of being a medieval food critic. That would be an adventure, right? Alright, settle in, friend. Let's talk about dinner, medieval peasant style. And no, we're not ordering takeout from ye old Chipotle. We're talking about food cooked over a hearth with tools so simple, you'd think they were designed by someone who'd never actually seen food before. Seriously, you might have more advanced equipment in your camping gear. Imagine this: you trudge back to your one-room hovel after a long day toiling in the fields. The sun is sinking, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple that would be quite Instagrammable if Instagram existed. Sadly, it doesn't. All you have is a crick in your back, the gnawing feeling of hunger, and the distinct aroma of, well, let's be honest, it's probably just manure. Your cooking setup is rudimentary. The heart of it all is the hearth itself, a simple fire pit usually built into one wall of your home. Smoke fills the room, stinging your eyes and clinging to your clothes like an unwanted suitor. Ah, the sweet smell of home. It's character building, let's say. You squint, trying to see through the haze as you poke at the embers with a stick. This, my friend, is the high-tech culinary center of your medieval life. Now, what about cookware? Forget your non-stick pans and fancy woks. You're looking at the bare minimum: a cauldron, maybe made of iron or, if you're particularly unfortunate, clay. This pot is your all-purpose workhorse. Boiling. Cauldron. Stewing. Cauldron. Trying to melt down your spare change to pay the Lord's taxes. Probably also the cauldron. You'll also likely have a few wooden bowls and spoons, and perhaps a crude knife. It's probably dull. Sharpening. What's sharpening? You're a peasant, not a surgeon. Anything sharper than a rock is considered a luxury. And speaking of luxuries, seasoning. Yeah, good luck with that. Salt is precious, like tiny, edible diamonds. Herbs are for those fancy folks in the manor. Your meals are flavored with, well, hope. And maybe a bit of dirt. If you're really lucky, you might have some onions or garlic grown in your tiny garden plot. Those are like hitting the medieval culinary lottery. So, what's on the menu tonight? Probably something involving grains. Grains are the cornerstone of the peasant diet. Think barley, oats, or rye, ground into flour and cooked into a thick porridge or a coarse bread. It's not exactly Michelin star material, but it fills the belly, and that's the main goal. You might also have some vegetables from your garden. Think root vegetables like turnips, carrots, and parsnips. These are hardy and easy to grow, perfect for a simple, unadventurous palate. You'll chuck them into the cauldron with whatever else you can find and hope for the best. Meat? Ah, yes, meat. This is where things get interesting, or rather, depressing. Meat is a rare treat for the average peasant. You might get a bit of pork or mutton a few times a year, usually during festivals or holidays. Hunting is generally forbidden on the Lord's land, so forget about poaching a deer. Though, let's be honest, desperate times call for desperate measures. A scrawny rabbit might mysteriously find its way into your stew now and then. You didn't see anything, and neither did I, wink, wink. One important aspect of medieval peasant cooking is preservation. You don't have a refrigerator, obviously. So, you need to find ways to make food last. Salting is a common method, especially for meat. You can also dry foods, like grains and beans, to store them for longer periods. Pickling is another option, though vinegar can be hard to come by. Basically, you're trying to ward off spoilage with whatever tools you have at your disposal. Now, let's talk about cooking techniques. The most common method is boiling. Everything goes into the cauldron and simmers for hours, or even days. It's a simple and effective way to cook food, even if it does result in a rather homogeneous flavor profile. Everything tastes vaguely like everything else. It's like the culinary equivalent of beige. Roasting is another option, but it's less common. You might roast meat on a spit over the fire, if you're lucky enough to have meat. Or maybe you'll bake bread in the embers, wrapping it in leaves to prevent it from burning. But honestly, most of your food is going to be boiled. Embrace the monotony. Here's a quirky tidbit: did you know that some peasants used to cook food in earthenware pots buried directly in the hot embers of the fire? It's like a medieval slow cooker. Imagine the flavor. Well, actually, don't. It was probably gritty and smoky. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were generally malnourished. Some studies suggest that their diets were surprisingly adequate, while others paint a grim picture of widespread hunger and vitamin deficiencies. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, varying depending on the region, the season, and the lord you happen to be stuck with. Some lords were benevolent, relatively speaking, while others were less so. One mainstream historical fact is that the medieval diet was heavily influenced by the church. Meat consumption was restricted on certain days of the week, and during Lent. This led to the development of creative vegetarian dishes, though I doubt they were anything like the vegan masterpieces you see on Instagram today. Think more along the lines of beans, but sadder. Remember that open fire we talked about? Yeah, that's not just for cooking. It's also your source of heat and light. So, your one-room hovel is constantly filled with smoke and the smell of burning wood. It's not exactly a health spa. But hey, at least it keeps the bugs away. Mostly. Let's consider the social aspect of cooking. Food preparation is often a communal activity. Families work together to gather ingredients, prepare meals, and tend the fire. It's a chance to socialize and share stories, even if the stories are mostly about how much the Lord sucks. Misery loves company, after all. One might think that after a while, cooking the same bland food, day in, day out, would get a little boring. One might be right. However, variety was often dictated by the seasons. In the spring, you might gather wild greens and herbs. In the summer, you'd have access to more fruits and vegetables. Autumn brought the harvest, a time of relative abundance. And winter, well, winter was a time for huddling around the fire and dreaming of spring. And also praying that you had enough firewood to survive. And now, a joke. A medieval peasant walks into a bar and asks for a beer. The bartender says, "Sorry, we only serve nights." The peasant sighs and says, well, that's just medieval prejudice. Now, before you start feeling too sorry for the medieval peasant, remember that they were incredibly resilient. They lived hard lives, but they also knew how to make the most of what they had. They were resourceful, ingenious, and incredibly tough. And they probably didn't have to deal with internet trolls. So, swings and roundabouts, really. So, as you sit down to your own dinner tonight, take a moment to appreciate the convenience of modern cooking. Think about the medieval peasant, hunched over their hearth, stirring a pot of unappetizing gruel. And then be thankful that you can order pizza with the click of a button. Historians still argue over the exact caloric intake of the average medieval peasant. Was it enough to sustain them through their grueling workdays? Or were they constantly on the verge of starvation? The evidence is often fragmentary and difficult to interpret. But one thing is certain, they worked hard for every bite. Here's another fringe tidbit. Some historians believe that certain medieval peasant communities developed sophisticated techniques for fermenting foods, creating alcoholic beverages like cider and mead. So, it wasn't all porridge and turnips. There was some fun to be had, even if it did involve questionable hygiene standards. And finally, another joke for the road. What do you call a medieval peasant who's always complaining? A grown-up. Alright, friend, I think we've sufficiently explored the culinary world of the medieval peasant. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, but it was their reality. And now, hopefully, you can appreciate your own reality a little bit more. Okay, settle in, friend. Let's talk food. But not just any food, the communal kind. The feasts, the fairs, the overflowing tables groaning under the weight of shared dishes. You know, the kind that makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside, or maybe just incredibly bloated. Depends on who's cooking, really. You trudge through the dusty fairgrounds, the air thick with the smell of frying dough and questionable meats. 1,000 voices buzz around you, a happy cacophony punctuated by the barker trying to convince you that his deep-fried Twinkie is somehow superior to the 50 others on offer. It's a scene repeated across centuries, really. Think medieval market day, a Renaissance festival, even your local county fair. It's all the same, a celebration of harvest, community, and the human capacity to consume truly astonishing amounts of sugar. Mainstream historical fact, fairs and festivals have been a staple of human culture for millennia. Think ancient Rome, with its festivals dedicated to gods like Ceres, goddess of agriculture. These weren't just parties, they were vital economic engines. Farmers brought their produce to sell, artisans displayed their wares, and merchants came to strike deals. It was a chance for rural communities to connect with the wider world, a little like a really big farmer's market with slightly more pickpockets. And probably way more questionable hygiene. Quirky tidbit, did you know that in medieval Europe, certain fairs were designated as pie powder courts? Pie powder. I love that. These were temporary courts set up to resolve disputes that arose during the fair. Imagine small claims court, but with more mud and the constant background noise of bleating sheep. The name supposedly comes from the French pieds poudres, meaning dusty feet, referring to the traveling merchants who needed quick justice. So if you got swindled on a bolt of cloth, you could take your case to the pie powder court. Honestly, that sounds like the title of a delightfully absurd Monty Python sketch. Historians still argue whether these fairs were primarily economic or social events. Were they driven by the need to trade and barter, or by the human desire to gather, celebrate, and perhaps win a prize for the largest pumpkin? The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in between. After all, what's a good trade deal without a bit of friendly competition, a shared meal, and the chance to show off your prized gourd? You can feel it, can't you, the sticky fingers, the jostling crowds, the sheer audacity of a society that gathers together to sell its produce. You find a spot at a long, communal table, already crowded with people you've never met, but who are suddenly your closest companions. A steaming bowl of stew, or maybe it's a hearty peasant soup, the exact ingredients are a mystery, but it smells comforting. You spoon it up, sharing bread and stories with your newfound friends. It's this act of sharing food that knits communities together. Remember that time you made that dish? Remember how much it meant to hear your friends talk about your food as you were present? These are the moments we cherish most. That's the magic of a feast, the joy of community. It's about more than just sustenance, it's about belonging. A little more mainstream history, feasts have played a vital role in political and social life throughout history. Think of the banquets held by Roman emperors, intended to impress foreign dignitaries and solidify their power. Or the elaborate feasts of medieval kings, displays of wealth and authority meant to overawe their subjects. These weren't just dinner parties, they were carefully orchestrated performances, designed to project an image of strength and stability. I bet they had some pretty incredible desserts, though. Possibly involving swans. Quirky fact, in some cultures, food played a significant role in funerary rituals. Ancient Egyptians, for example, would leave food offerings for the deceased, believing that the departed needed sustenance in the afterlife. And, let's not forget, that some cultures still share food with the deceased in remembrance, not necessarily out of belief. Some foods are even believed to be bad luck, such as certain fruits or vegetables. Because it's hard to argue when you're dead. Historians still debate the extent to which these feasts were truly egalitarian. Did everyone get a fair share, or were they primarily designed to benefit the elite? Were they genuine expressions of community solidarity, or simply a way for those in power to maintain their control? Were there actually enough swan-shaped pastries to go around? Again, probably a bit of both. The thing is, food has a way of both uniting and dividing us. A shared meal can break down barriers, fostering a sense of camaraderie. But it can also highlight differences in status, wealth, and cultural background. Who sits at the head of the table? Who gets the choicest cuts of meat? Who has to settle for the soggy end of the bread loaf? It's always me, by the way. You push back from the table, feeling surprisingly full. That stew, whatever it was, really hit the spot. You wander through the fairgrounds again, the sounds and smells still swirling around you. You pass a group of children, their faces smeared with jam, giggling as they chase each other through the crowds. It's beautiful, but what about the people who don't have the ability to feed their children? You begin to understand that food is as important as a person to the world. But the food that is provided during these feasts and meals is an equalizer. Consider this, a mainstream historical moment. The Thanksgiving tradition in the United States, ostensibly celebrating the first harvest shared between the Pilgrims and the Native Americans. While this narrative is often romanticized, it serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of gratitude and shared bounty. However, the tradition also obscures a far more complicated and often brutal history of colonization and displacement. So, yeah, mashed potatoes are great, but let's not forget the complexities. Now for a quirky tidbit, did you know that in some cultures, certain foods are believed to have magical properties? In some parts of the world, eating garlic is thought to ward off vampires, garlic breath. In others, certain herbs and spices are believed to bring good luck or enhance fertility. And then there's cilantro. Some people think it tastes like soap. To each their own, I guess. Historians still argue about the origins and evolution of these food-related beliefs and practices. Are they rooted in ancient religions and rituals, or are they simply the result of generations of trial and error? Do they reflect a deep understanding of the nutritional properties of certain foods, or are they just superstitions? What even is cilantro? You see, food is never just food. It's a symbol, a story, a connection to our past and a reflection of our present. It's a source of joy, a source of comfort, and, let's be honest, sometimes a source of indigestion. But it's always a reminder that we are all connected, that we all share the basic human need for sustenance, and that even the simplest meal can be a celebration of community. You find yourself at the end of a long, winding road, a road paved not with gold, but with, well, probably more like rye bread crumbs and the stubborn resilience of generations. You've walked alongside the peasant, tasted their simple fare, and glimpsed the world through their eyes. Now, as the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, it's time to consider the legacy of that journey, that diet, that very existence. Think about it, for centuries, the backbone of most societies, the vast majority of the population, lived a life dictated by the land. Their food wasn't a lifestyle choice, it was survival. It wasn't farm to table, it was the table. The very essence of their being, their health, their culture, their community, all intricately woven into the fabric of what they ate. And what they ate wasn't exactly a gourmet delight. Think of it less as a Michelin-starred experience and more as a, can I get through another winter? Buffet. The impact on health is, well, complicated. On one hand, the physically demanding lifestyle kept them surprisingly fit. No gym memberships needed when your daily workout involves plowing fields with an ox. Plus, the lack of processed foods. Total win. No sugary cereals to fuel the kids, or let's be honest, you too. On the other hand, malnutrition was a constant threat. Famine was a grim reaper lurking in the shadows, and nutrient deficiencies were as common as dirt under your fingernails, or perhaps even in your fingernails, depending on how the harvest went. It's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? Strength born of hardship, resilience forged in deprivation. Think about scurvy, that delightful disease caused by vitamin C deficiency. Today, we chug orange juice. Back then, you'd be gnawing on the odd bit of preserved cabbage, hoping for the best. Historians still argue whether the average lifespan was shorter due to diet alone, or if other factors like disease and the perils of childbirth played a larger role. You can bet those medieval midwives weren't handing out participation trophies, that's for sure. And yet, these peasant diets, born of necessity, profoundly shaped culture. Food became more than just sustenance, it became a symbol of identity, a way to connect with the land and with each other. Think of the humble loaf of bread. It wasn't just flour and water, it was a symbol of community, shared labor, and sustenance. Breaking bread together wasn't just a nice gesture, it was a fundamental social act. You offered someone bread, you offered them life. Consider the endless variations on porridge, polenta, and gruel found across Europe. Each region had its own version, its own little twist, its own fiercely guarded family recipe passed down through generations. It wasn't about fancy ingredients, it was about making the most of what you had, about transforming the ordinary into something nourishing and comforting. You can imagine Grandma's recipe for mystery gruel being the source of both pride and suspicion at the family gatherings. Is that turnip I taste? Mainstream history often overlooks these culinary nuances, focusing instead on the feasts of kings and the banquets of nobles. But the real story of a society, the story of its heart and soul, often resides in the humble kitchens and the fields where the majority toiled. And sometimes, the fields where they toiled may well have been, on the kitchen. I mean, you know, dirt floors and all that. Now, let's talk about that culture a little bit more. The peasant diet wasn't just about what you ate, it was about how you ate. Meals were communal affairs, often eaten around a shared hearth, fostering a sense of belonging and solidarity. Food-related festivals and celebrations punctuated the agricultural calendar, offering moments of respite from the relentless grind of daily life. Think harvest festivals, with their hearty stews and overflowing jugs of cider. These weren't just boozy bacchanals, although, let's be honest, there was probably a bit of that too. They were opportunities to give thanks, to celebrate the bounty of the earth, and to reinforce social bonds. Quirky tidbit alert, in some cultures, specific foods were believed to have magical properties. Garlic, for instance, was thought to ward off vampires, take that, Nosferatu. And certain herbs were used not just for flavoring, but also for medicinal purposes. Your grandmother's insistence on adding chamomile to your tea wasn't just an old wives' tale, it was part of a long tradition of using food as medicine. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were based on actual efficacy or simply wishful thinking. But hey, if it worked for Grandma, who are we to judge? But the legacy of the peasant diet extends beyond health and culture. It also had a profound impact on society. The agricultural revolution, driven by the labor of countless peasants, transformed the world. It allowed for the development of cities, the rise of trade, and the emergence of complex social structures. In essence, the peasant, toiling away in the fields, laid the foundation for the modern world. You may not think of them as tech innovators, but they were the original disruptors. It's easy to romanticize the past, to imagine a world of rustic simplicity and idyllic rural landscapes. But the reality was often harsh and unforgiving. Poverty, inequality, and oppression were rampant. The peasant was often at the mercy of landlords, tax collectors, and the vagaries of the weather. And let's not forget the ever-present threat of war and disease. It was, to put it mildly, not always Instagram-worthy. But despite all the hardships, the peasant endured. They adapted, they innovated, and they persevered. They developed sophisticated farming techniques, built resilient communities, and passed down their traditions from generation to generation. They were the unsung heroes of history, the quiet force that shaped the world. You know, the people who actually made the world, instead of just tweeting about it. And the lessons they learned, the values they embraced, are still relevant today. The importance of community, the value of hard work, the connection to the land, the appreciation for simple things, these are all qualities that we can learn from the peasant experience. And also, maybe, just maybe, to appreciate the wonders of modern plumbing. Now, as the light fades and the stars begin to twinkle in the night sky, it's time to wind down. The journey through the fields of peasant history has been long and perhaps a little bumpy, but hopefully it's given you a newfound appreciation for the food on your table, and for the people who, for centuries, worked the land to provide it. Let your thoughts soften, your breath become more gentle. Imagine yourself sitting by a crackling fire, the scent of wood smoke mingling with the aroma of freshly baked bread. The day's labor is done, and the only sound is the gentle murmur of voices and the distant hooting of an owl. The world outside is quiet, still, and dark. All that matters now is the warmth of the fire, the comfort of your surroundings, and the feeling of contentment that comes from a day well spent. Let the images of the fields, the faces of the peasants, and the flavors of their simple meals fade into the background as you drift off to sleep. Know that you are safe, you are warm, and you are loved. Let go of any worries or concerns and allow yourself to be carried away on a gentle wave of relaxation. Breathe deeply, and release all tension from your body. Feel your muscles soften, your mind quiet down. The night is yours to rest, to dream, to simply be. Sweet dreams.